Geopolitical Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find the show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And, of course, you can listen to the show on a variety of platforms, of course, directly here at AFR in the archives on my website, on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, on YouTube. Of course, on Fridays from 10 to midnight, you can hear me replayed on Awake, PSN, PIR, and, of course, that Opperman Spreaker channel. And Saturday nights, 6 to 8 Mountain Time out in the, the great state of Utah on KYAH 540 AM. So lots of ways to listen to the show. And, of course, if you enjoy this and you want to support me, then you can always go to patreon.com where you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. And also, I highly encourage everyone to support AFR in any way that they can because, of course, I would not be here without American Freedom Radio and, of course, the great Danny Romero, who is behind the scenes producing all of my shows and in fact, everyone at AFR. So you can always support AFR by going to the donate button on AmericanFreedomRadio.com, also signing up on Patreon. Lots of ways to support us and all the excellent work that we do. But today, I'm very excited about today's show. We are joined, once again by our good friend Robbie Martin of Media Roots. And we are also joined on the line by writer, filmmaker, and 9/11 truth activist and researcher John Gold. So, Robbie and John, how are you guys?
Great. Thanks for having me again. And hi, John.
Hi, Robbie. How are you doing? Hey, Pierce. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on. Hi, Danny.
Excellent. And, John, I think, hopefully the listeners will be familiar with some of your work because you've been doing, just a whole host of things for many years. But we've new listeners always joining the show. So, John Gold, tell everyone a little bit about yourself. Who is John Gold, and what have you been doing?
Well, my name is John Gold, born in Philadelphia. What have I been doing? For the past 5 years, unfortunately, I've been dealing with a broken back. But prior to that, I was doing a lot of activism. I was an advocate for 9/11 justice, an advocate for responders and New Yorkers regarding the environmental impact of 9/11. I've been an anti-war activist. I've done a multitude of things concerning 9/11 and the post-9/11 world and everything that entails.
Absolutely. And tell people, too, where they can go to check out some of your work. I mean, I know you've got a YouTube channel that you're pretty active on, but let everybody know that.
Okay. First off, I have a book that was written in 2012, or released 2012, called 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability. And in that book, I actually give the definition for what a 9/11 truther is, and it's essentially somebody because I was the one who coined that phrase, Anyway, I defined it by saying that it's somebody who works with the families who are seeking truth, accountability, and justice, supports the 9/11 first responders seeking health care, and trying to put an end to the post-9/11 world using something that we've been denied, the truth. And, that's essentially what I've been trying to do for the last 15 years or so, almost 16 years.
Excellent. And we will definitely link up to if people want to purchase your book and, of course, support you in any way. And as I said, we're going to be covering, obviously, talking about 9/11 today. But, this is one of these things that obviously I've talked about this before on the show. Robbie, you and I have talked about 9/11 many times before. Hopefully Tom Stecker will finish editing our recent review of the film The Reflecting Pool, which deals with 9/11. Say again?
I think that's an old film, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. We've been doing this sort of like series of like 9/11 B movies, and the most recent one that we covered was The Reflecting Pool.
We're doing it. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I'll send them. I'll send you the links for the other ones, John. I think you'll probably get a kick out of some of them. Again, this has always been something that's sort of been on my mind, and certainly I think anyone that gets involved in conspiracy culture, the alternative media, any of this, obviously, 9/11 is a big part of that, or in many ways is the reason that people become so involved in all of this. We're also going to be looking, though, because it seems that some of the more important and overlooked aspects of 9/11, stuff that has been developing in the past, even within the past couple of days, has just sort of been completely obscured and overlooked. And there are some, current campaigns, there are some lawsuits that we're going to be getting into that are seeking to actually uncover the truth and more importantly, seek justice for the families of the victims of 9/11. And excuse me, before we kind of dive into that, I wanted to kind of get your take, and I know we've sort of talked about this before, but I want to get your take on, I guess, where the 9/11 truth movement lies. And John, maybe we'll start with you, because it just seems to have kind of entirely faded away from the public. I think a little bit later, we're going to talk about, the first responders and the physical ailments that are going on with them, which again is just almost non-existent. But as someone that's been involved for many, many years in this, how do you see it in the sort of context of, all these things, the alternative media, conspiracy culture, all of this sort of stuff? Because again, even though there are some current court cases, there is some real stuff going on. You wouldn't know that from the face of it. It's not about Trump or something like that. It just sort of gets ignored. So I don't know, John, what's your take on that?
That's been the history of 9/11 since 9/11. Anything that's come out that has refuted the official account, it comes out in pieces over time. Like, for instance, in 2006, there was a report by Lou Dobbs about, I think it was NORAD, and it was on CNN, and it got one segment and no follow-up and no context. And they do that over time. They release these things over time so it doesn't digest for the public. And another thing that they do is they do not provide context in any of their reports of things pertaining to the multitude of cover-ups concerning 9/11. For instance, if they started every article saying that, quote, knowing that the 9/11 Commission was an absolute farce and a travesty, here now we have something else to show you, something to that regard, that regard. So nobody ever gets the pieces of the puzzle, and the American public, sadly, just does not know because, again, it doesn't get reported on. And I can give you for instance. There was a film called 9/11 Press for Truth that was released in September 2006 that starred Paul Thompson, the creator of what's called the Complete 9/11 Timeline, which is available at historycommons.org. And it also starred the family members that literally fought for the creation of the 9/11 Commission. They had to fight. Think about that. They had to fight Washington, D.C. to get an investigation into 9/11. They wouldn't have had the 9/11 Commission if not for the family. So think about that for just 1 second. So 9/11 Press for Truth was released. The entire U.S. Continental News Service just ignored it. I don't know what to call it. The entire, with the exception of movie critics, no one covered it. Not one outlet covered it. And there was another movie from ABC at the time that came out that was endorsed, I think, by Thomas Keane, who was the chairman of the 9/11 Commission, called Path to 9/11, which was factually incorrect and had all these problems with it. Even the actors had problems with some of what they were saying. And that got so much attention. And another thing that got attention at that time was Ann Coulter, who came out and attacked the Jersey Girls, the four widows that were responsible for the creation of the 9/11 Commission, along with people like Sally Regenhard and Monica Gabrielle and Bob McIlvaine and other family members. She came out and attacked them, literally, and got so much press. And there were people on the TV that were defending what she was saying. And it was just absolutely disgusting. And that got all of the attention. But 9/11 Press for Truth, which called into question the entire official account of 9/11, got no attention whatsoever. And literally, it seemed like they decided to focus on loose change.
Yeah.
And ignore Press for Truth. And that was not Dylan Avery's fault. It seems that the news selected him, or for whatever reason, chose to focus on loose change. And they still do it. At the end of last year, we heard about Osama bin Laden having loose change in his collection. And we heard about that years ago, literally. But they came out with it again as if it was a new story. It was so weird. Anyway, years ago, we heard about it, and I joked that, maybe Osama was trying to figure out what happened on 9/11. But anyway, it's just disgusting. They've completely ignored it with very few exceptions. But movie critics all gave it great reviews. All of them who were willing to do it. And I think, honestly, they were trying to take a stand at the time. But who knows?
Well, and Robbie, I'll throw that to you as well. Just I'm sure some people are kind of listening to this and just, why are they even sort of trudging this up? But it is such an important event, and it is like every time, Robbie, me, you, and Tom do these reviews of these B movies. I mean, we get into so much information, and there's still so much to wrap your head around, and there is new stuff coming out. So I guess, I don't know. To me, it is still an important aspect of our lives and culture, and deserves more and more attention.
Let me just say one thing. Everything that we've done in the Middle East and elsewhere, everything that we've done in Syria, Libya, has been justified using what's called the Authorization for Use of Military Force that was written after 9/11 to go specifically after those responsible for 9/11. That has been the legal justification for so many things, including warrantless wiretapping and other things that have happened. And it's still being used today as the legal justification for everything that has transpired as a result of that day, in the name of that day, and the names of those lost on that day. Years ago, I was learning all this stuff about 9/11, just learning. Then I saw Bob McIlvaine cry on a stage in New York City because he didn't know. He wanted to know how his son was murdered, and he didn't know. And he wanted to know. And can you imagine knowing everything that we do on top of having lost someone that day? That is an unimaginable thought to me. And it was one of the main driving factors. You want to do the best you can for them, the families, and everybody else who's been affected. How many people have we killed in the name of 9/11 that had nothing to do with it? It's just absurd. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, Robbie, I'm going to throw it to you just to kind of get your take on where it all is, and sort of piggybacking on what John was just saying. I mean, there's, all of these, for instance, it used to be a thing, like if you were going to become a figure in the conspiracy culture, alternative media, podcasting and stuff, you kind of, one of the questions was, well, do you believe that 9/11, the official story or something? You don't even hear that being discussed. That's no longer even on the table. And, you and I, Robbie, we've talked about the whole anthrax stuff, which is definitely deeply related to 9/11. And we're already kind of seeing that popping up again, most recently with Donald Trump Jr. and this letter that was mailed to his house. So, I mean, it's still in the ether. It's still out there. And yet it seems as if it's this non-issue amongst everyone. So, I don't know. Where do you feel with that?
Go ahead, Robbie.
I mean, it's really disappointing for me that it's not more of a topic of discussion anymore in popular culture. But in a way, I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing because, as you pointed out and John pointed out, that most of the discussions in popular culture have been to smear 9/11 truthers or to mischaracterize them or to make it seem like all of them, think that the planes were holograms and things like that.
Well, that's what I just had. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that, I feel like we're sort of past the era already of, one example I go back to is Star Trek Into Darkness, which was the second Star Trek film. And one of the screenwriters on that film is actually an open truther. And that film actually kind of has a coded, barely coded sort of 9/11 truth plot sort of embedded in it. And I feel like we're sort of out of that era already. Like there was a point where it seemed like, wow, this is sort of really soaking into the sort of our cultural landscape. But at the same time, there has been this extreme pushback just in terms of like the stuff coming out in popular culture where the CIA is now made, has been so rebranded at this point where they're made to look like absolute heroes. It would almost be unheard of for a popular Hollywood movie to come out right now where the CIA are portrayed as like dark, like sociopathic characters that are intent on killing people. So, I mean, yeah, it's disappointing to me that there's not more, I guess if I could put it in a larger context, I think even just going beyond 9/11, it's very disappointing to me that American culture right now doesn't seem to sees the U.S. government largely as a benevolent force. A benevolent force. They don't see it as something that is genuinely harmful to the state of the world. And I feel like there was a chance sort of during the Bush administration, especially during the end, where people were really waking up to that fact. And I feel like we're sort of back in this place of acquiescence. And I think that kind of goes along with our willingness to really look at 9/11 honestly, because I would be willing to bet, and I can't prove this, there's no way to scientifically poll this even, but I would be willing to bet the majority of the American public knows that something on a deep level is not right about the 9/11 official story, but it's hard to articulate and it's hard to even know where to start with addressing that, especially because of the barrage of information online, and most of it's crap, frankly.
That's why I use the phrase, we were lied to about 9/11. That's a very simple statement, and it's absolute fact. I never liked the phrase 9/11 was an inside job. I was never a fan of Alex Jones. I've been inspired. First of all, I came into this all on my own. Like no writer, no author, no movie maker brought me into this. It was in January 2002 when a CNN report talked about how Bush and Cheney went to Tom Daschle's office and asked him to, quote, limit the scope of the commercial. Later said that they came to him literally and asked him not to investigate 9/11 at all. That was in January of 2002. Then in May of 2002, news of what was called the August 6th presidential daily briefing had been leaked, or part of that, I guess, had been leaked, and the New York Post came out with a massive headline that said Bush knew. Because we had, after 9/11, I don't know if you remember, we were told repeatedly that there absolutely were no warnings, that nobody had any idea this was going to happen, that this was a complete surprise attack. And that was the story that we were told. We were bombarded with that story. There's a section at historycommons.org called 9/11 Denials that talks about all of the mass denials by people about knowing anything that was coming. So when the August 6th PDB came out and showed that there was a warning, that spoke about buildings in New York or hijackings or other types of attacks, I think that's an exact quote, that there were, I think this was an exaggerated number, but 70 FBI Al-Qaeda related cases taking place in the United States, and so forth. So there was a warning that Bush had received on August 6th, 2001. But he received, 39, I guess, other presidential daily briefings that we're not even allowed to see. And that was kind of a trick that was done. I think Robbie and I talked about that before. that the August 6th PDB got all of the attention.
Yep.
In the 9/11 report, in the news, and elsewhere, and every other PDB that was Al-Qaeda related got no attention. And we don't even know what's in them because they're still classified. But that's what the 9/11 Commission focused on, and the news, was that August 6th PDB. And once I read that, I was off to the races. Because I was just like every other typical American. I didn't know anything. I relied on the television for all of the information that I knew. And I can tell you right now, if people watch television, they should stop. I haven't had cable for a decade, like literally. And if I want to know about something, I go look it up myself. And that's it. I get alerts. And go on. You guys could talk.
Well, no, I mean, that kind of brings us to the first thing that I wanted to kind of get into. Again, something that's not being reported on cable news or really anywhere. And that is sort of some of the current efforts by a group of 9/11 families that are attempting to sue the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for providing support to several of the perpetrators of 9/11. Of course, everyone knows all but 3 of the hijackers were Saudi. And there's always been a belief, and there's quite a bit of evidence suggesting that Saudi Arabia was deeply involved in all of this. And this lawsuit is pretty important in a lot of ways. And I want to get, John, I want you to kind of talk about a little bit about the history and background of this. And because this isn't necessarily the first time that families of victims have tried to sue. But there was just a few days ago, or maybe it was back, or in the late January, early February. The judge in question of this lawsuit is sort of once again kind of dragged his feet, and I want to get into him a little bit later. But John, this is a ongoing criminal case. The families have been providing what I would assume would be ample evidence of the Saudi involvement in all of this, and yet it's just sort of kind of completely ignored. So, John, just very briefly, give us a little sort of overview about, because you know some of the family members or victims quite well. I know you know the Jersey Girls as well. So talk a little bit about the history of lawsuits that have attempted to, seek justice for the people that were murdered.
First off, I just want to say quickly that I'm here to speak for myself. I don't speak for the families in any way. This past anniversary, you spoke of the 9/11 Truth Movement just not being non-existent anymore. And I had a lot of emails and just, you're a hero and this and that. And that was a lot of pressure for me. I didn't come into this to be a hero. And it says in my book that I'm not a hero. I'm a regular Joe Schmo American who saw something that was wrong and tried to make a difference, tried to make it right. That's all I am. And I worked with the families because I felt so bad for the families and I wanted to help them in any way that I could. So that's what I tried to do. And I built relationships with a lot of them, and I respect and love all of them. But anyway, the 9/11 Truth Movement, the way that it was, supporting the family members, supporting the responders, pointing out discrepancies in what we were told about that day in order to show people that we need truth, accountability, and justice, and so forth. That movement turned into the buildings movement, unfortunately. Yeah. One thing that was hard for everybody to wrap their heads around, that's what it became. And I tried to stop it. Years ago, I wrote an article said this is not the controlled demolition movement, and I got a lot of flack for that. I got flack from people inside the movement and outside the movement, debunkers and all that stuff. So the history of the Saudi thing, first off, do you guys remember the Saudi flights after 9/11?
Of course.
Yeah,
The ones that Richard Clark came out and said, no, I was the one who authorized that. It wasn't Bush, trying to sort of take away the heat from Bush. Yeah.
Right. So they were essentially protected from the very beginning, in one form or another. And they were protected by the Bush administration. They were protected by the Obama administration. And that's one thing a lot of people don't know, because when Obama came into office, you guys were speaking about the latter part of the Bush administration and how people were opening their eyes a little bit. Obama came into office, and with that $1 billion Hope and Change campaign that everyone believed, and did the same exact things that Bush did essentially, but didn't get the coverage that Bush did. You know, because Republicans and Democrats are portrayed as different parties, when in fact they agree on basically 90% of everything, especially wars and, you know, anything. But the latter part of the Bush administration, people believed, you know, a little bit, and then Obama came in and everything was okay. You know, everything that was immoral and illegal under Bush became moral and legal under Obama. You know, we did the Camp Out Now thing in 2010, where we camped out across from the White House. Barely anybody showed up, you know, to support us. You know, maybe 200 people showed up. It was very sad because people, you know, the news just wasn't telling you what was going on anymore, you know, than I don't know what happened. It just seemed like a lot of people fell for the Hope and Change campaign and just thought that everything was okay now. So they stopped being active, a lot of people.
Well, and let's get into this sort of various lawsuits that have tried to kind of target the Saudis. And John, maybe you can explain why they're going after the Saudis and say not the U.S. government.
Well, first off, the lawsuit has a lot. Every time 9/11 has made it into a courtroom, we've learned things that we never knew about before.
Yeah,
and that's what a courtroom is. That's what it's about. It's about discovery. It's about having subpoena power. It's about having the ability to call people to testify under oath with the idea that if they lie, they're going to be held accountable for perjury. You know, the 9/11 Commission had subpoena power and used it twice. They could have, you know, recommended that people be held accountable. They were going to do it with NORAD, but then it was decided instead of going to the Department of Justice that it would go to the corrupt Department of Defense Inspector General's office, who let NORAD off the hook for lying. You know, there was no accountability from the 9/11 Commission, and that's what a courtroom is about. Be able to get more truth, maybe some accountability, maybe some justice. That's all it's about. So the families want to take Saudi Arabia to a court of law. That's all they want to do, to be able to have access to the things that I spoke of, so that maybe they can get some truth, accountability, and justice. So that's what they're fighting for. They've been fighting to get into Saudi Arabia, into a courtroom for years, and every time it seems that they've been shot down, either through protection of the White House, both Bush and Obama. You know, when Obama came into office in 2009, in January, I think January of 2009, maybe February, he had a meeting with the family members. And the purpose of the meeting was to discuss Gitmo. And one of the family members, Kristen Brautweiser, spoke to Obama himself and asked for what was called the 28 redacted pages from the Joint Congressional Inquiry about Saudi Arabia and so forth to be released. He said he would. Never heard back from Obama with regards to that until the end of his administration. He released those. They turned out to be 29 pages. He released them, but with redactions throughout. There were 3 pages that were still blank. But one of the things that we did learn was that Prince Bandar, who was the Saudi ambassador to the United States for 2 decades, I think, he was connected to money that was given to associates of the hijackers in the United States. And so in the 28 pages, it says, quote, on at least one occasion, Osama Baznan received a check directly from Prince Bandar's account. According to the FBI, on May 14th, 1998, Baznan cashed a check from Bandar in the amount of $13,000. Baznan's wife also received at least one check directly from Bandar. She also received one additional check from Bandar's wife, which she cashed on January 8th, 1998 for $10,000. And that's on page 427 of the Joint Congressional Inquiry's report. Something we didn't know. It was a direct financial link. We had known about Bandar's wife being connected to some of the money of the hijackers, but we never knew about a direct link between Bandar and so forth. So that's one of the things Bush wanted to hide. And guess what? George W. Bush and the Bush family were besties with Prince Bandar. Now imagine if the American public were told about that on a great scale, that it got the same amount of attention that the Russia election story is getting, or the Swift Boat veterans got, or, you know, the Ice Bucket Challenge, or Michael Jackson's death, or any of those things. If it had gotten the attention any of those things did, this would be a different world, I think. People would be demanding truth, accountability, and I mean, okay, in 1997, Bush the First got Bandar to teach Bush about foreign policy. So that was his coach in 1997. In May, I think it was May or March of 2001, Bandar and Bush were talking about the need for decisive military action in Iraq, that the flyover wasn't working anymore, the flyovers and whatever they call that. And then, oh man, I forget what else was going on, but it was very odd for the President of the United States and somebody connected financially, supposedly to 9/11, were talking about the need for decisive military action in Iraq.
I was just talking with a friend recently, and the 9/11 thing came up, and they're like, really? You know, like, you really kind of buy into that? And, I mean, I just brought up I brought up Yassin al-Qadi, which maybe we could talk about later, but also just the mere fact that Bush was involved in a company related to, you know, one of Bin Laden's brothers or something, and George Bush, the current president. I mean, that alone should raise eyebrows, and not to mention all these Saudis that were flown out, and indeed the Saudi angle is, to me, is one of the more. I know that it tends to have this. I don't know. There's like a negativity surrounding it. You know, I mean, we can talk about the 28 pages. You know, and I'm guilty of this as well. I dismissed them as some sort of smokescreen or red herring when they first came out, and it's only, you know, later now with a little bit of clarity and you know, and hindsight that you begin to see the importance of not only the 28 pages, but again, as you were saying before, John, getting Saudi Arabia in a courtroom, actually having subpoena power, getting some of these officials. I mean, I don't know if Bandar, whatever, you know, would come to the Southern District of New York and testify, but conceivably, I mean, you know, if he did, I mean, that would be a field, you would have a field day with that. And it doesn't have to be Bandar. I mean, there can be lesser officials. I mean, I'm fine with, you know, just seeking something. And again, as you say too, interesting information. I mean, we can look at this recent court case right now. I mean, there's already been some fascinating information, more stuff about Khalid al-Madar and Nawaf al-Hamzi, two Saudi hijackers that were possibly entering the United States and leaving multiple times, renting apartments, seemingly sort of unlimited amounts of cash that was flowing to them. They didn't speak English, yet they were renting cars and driving around. I mean, this is some new information and some solid confirmation of all of these things. But again, they kind of get poo-pooed. You know, it's, who cares about the Saudis? You know, they're not as important as the CIA.
When the 28 pages were released, there was a campaign in the news of multiple people saying that there was nothing to what was in those pages. Nobody was focusing on exactly what was in those pages. They were just saying, there's nothing to it. In fact, Zelikow came out And Philip Zelikow was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission. Right. He was in charge of everything. Who would be questioned, what questions would be asked, and so forth. The 9/11 commissioners were eye candy, essentially. He was the one in charge. But I want to read a statement to you from the families that was released on the 17th of January, if that would be okay.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. Statement of September 11th advocates regarding Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's motion to dismiss the lawsuit. And these are the jurors who go, well, Lori Van Auken, Kristen Brautweiser, Monica Gabrielle, and Mindy Kleinberg are the ones who wrote this. So on the eve of the 9/11 family's arrival to the Southern District of New York, in parentheses, ever mindful that the courtroom is located a scant half mile from ground zero, end parentheses, in order to answer the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's motion to dismiss, we are heartened and hopeful to proceed on our 17-year path of justice to hold the alleged murderers of our husbands accountable in a court of law. First and foremost, in anticipation of the Saudis' hackneyed defense that the 9/11 Commission found no evidence implicating the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in the 9/11 attacks, as former 9/11 Commissioner Family Steering Committee members who fought for and oversaw the 9/11 Commission's progress, we can unequivocally state that the 9/11 Commission's final report did not in any way exonerate the Saudis. In fact, regarding the alleged Saudi role in the 9/11 attacks, the 9/11 Commission wrote an entire supplemental monograph on terrorist financing entitled The 9/11 Commission Monograph on Terrorist Funding. Notably, the Saudis are mentioned nearly 450 times in this 155-page 9/11 terrorist funding report. Parenthetically, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, is only mentioned approximately 86 times. Pakistan is mentioned 25 times, Iraq is mentioned 3 times, and the Republic of Iran is not mentioned at all. In short, anyone who's taken the time to read the 9/11 Commission monograph on terrorist funding for its probative and evidentiary value will find that there's plenty of, quote, there, end quote, regarding the alleged Saudi role in the 9/11 attacks. Nevertheless, should the information provided in the 9/11 Commission monograph on terrorist funding not be sufficient evidence to support the allegation that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia played a role in the 9/11 attacks, the declassified 28 pages of the Joint Inquiry of Congress also provides a wealth of information regarding the alleged Saudi logistical and financial role in the 9/11 attacks. And if reading the 9/11 Commission's monograph on terrorist funding and the 28 pages of the Joint Inquiry of Congress aren't enough evidence to support the allegation that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia played a role in the 9/11 attacks, then perhaps you can simply listen to the words of the 9/11 commissioners themselves. Quote, contrary to the view advocated by the Kingdom, the 9/11 Commission did not exonerate Saudi Arabia of culpability for the events of September 11, 2001, or the financing of al-Qaeda in the years leading up to the September 11th attacks, end quote. That's from former 9/11 Commissioner John Lehman. I should say something very fast about John Lehman. He asked Bush, during when the 9/11 commissioners met with Bush and Cheney together, not under oath, no transcripts allowed, no recordings allowed, and it's just a ridiculous situation that nobody wanted. John Lehman asked Bush specifically about Bandar's financial ties, and Bush, quote, dodged the questions. And, okay, and afterwards he gave a press conference where he said he answered all the questions. Anyway, let me continue. Quote, we certainly didn't pursue the entire line of inquiry in regard to Saudi Arabia. As far as I'm concerned, we do not have the whole truth. As an example, the Saudi government and its lawyers repeatedly assert that the 9/11 Commission on which I served concluded that it and the royal family had nothing to do with 9/11. That is just untrue, end quote. And that's from Bob Kerry, who is 9/11 Commissioner. Quote, we certainly did not exonerate the Saudis. That's why we need to continue to get to the bottom of this, end quote. That's Tim Romer, also served on the Joint Inquiry for Congress and the 9/11 Commission and the 9/11 Commission Review Panel. Quote, clearly the central moving figures in the 9/11 scandal were Saudi, and clearly that wasn't a coincidence, end quote. The fact that there is a particularly militant and extremely conservative form of Islam that is, in effect, the state religion of Saudi Arabia, well, there has always been tension between the United States and Saudi Arabia over that. That's Slade Gordon, and honestly, there wasn't. But anyway, among the areas warranting further, I mean, okay, they say there were problems between Saudi Arabia because of that, and I didn't see it, but whatever. I'm not going to go against the families. Quote, among the areas warranting further investigation was the relationship between the hijackers of Saudi Arabian national origin and certain other Saudi individuals and entities, particularly whether knowing assistance, aid, or comfort was provided to the hijackers while they were in the United States, and if so, whether any official representative or entity related to the government of Saudi Arabia either authorized or knew if the provision of any such assistance, aid, or comfort, end quote. That's Richard Benveniste. This goes on from the families. Notably, former 9/11 Commission Chairman Tom Keene served as director of Amarad Hess, an oil company that formed a joint venture with Delta Oil in 1998. Delta Oil had a financial backer by the name of Khalid bin Mahfouz. Mahfouz was allegedly implicated in the financing of Al-Qaeda through connections put forth in the infamous Golden Chains document. Former 9/11 Commission Chairman Lee Hamilton was appointed to the board of the BAE Systems in 2004. BAE Systems was implicated in the Al-Yamamah arms deal in 2007, wherein BAE was accused of paying £1 billion sterling to Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Former 9/11 Commissioner Jamie Gorelick, who is partner and attorney at Wilmer Hale was among its clients, has among its clients Prince Mohammed Al Fazl Al Saud, who was once a defendant in the 9/11 family's case against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Former 9/11 Commissioner Fred Fielding, President Ronald Reagan's White House counsel, approved of a $1 million payment to Nancy Reagan by Saudi King Fahd in the 1980s. The payment was allegedly arranged by Saudi ambassador to the United States, Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Moreover, for a defendant who spent millions of dollars in hiring more than 20 high-powered and influential Washington, D.C. lobbying firms to fight for years against the 9/11 anti-terrorism legislation, JASTA, which is Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, it is quite preposterous that the same defendant, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to now sustain that JASTA does not apply in this case. Even by Saudi royal spending standards, that's an awful lot of money, time, and energy thrown around on legislation that is now deemed by them to be irrelevant and unfit. It has nearly been 2 decades since the murder of our husbands and 3,000 others on the morning of September 11th, 2001. No American family should ever have to wait this long to receive justice for the murder of someone they loved on U.S. soil by terrorists. We very much look forward to the Honorable Judge George Daniels rejecting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's motion to dismiss so that the 9/11 families can finally receive our long overdue and painstakingly awaited day in court, and the world can bear witness to the facts surrounding the murder of our loved ones. And that's the end of what they had written. That was January 7th, 2018, 17th January 2018. And that was on the 17th of January this year. On the 18th, quote, Judge George Daniels said, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do with the report's ultimate conclusion or the facts regarding to the 9/11 report, whether they're sufficient for this court to independently reach the conclusions. And there was one sentence in the 9/11 report that said, quote, we found no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior Saudi officials individually funded the attacks Al-Qaeda masterminded. That was a sentence in the 9/11 report, which everybody pointed to say that they were exonerated. But there is other information. And I said that there was no problem between the United States and Saudi Arabia. There were problems. The FBI was investigating. There was somebody by the name of Robert Wright. Had something called vulgar betrayal that was investigating the Saudis. I mean, there was a lot of things going on, investigations, but the powers that be, it seemed, didn't care what Saudi Arabia did.
No, absolutely. And I mean, a lot to unpack there. And Robbie, maybe I'll throw it to you to kind of start. But you know, again, the big thing for me, and I understand that I'm sure people are yelling at their computer right now, you know, why are we harping on about the Saudis? Why aren't we talking about, oh God, you know, this angle, that angle, this thing? But, you know, again, what you were just talking about there, John, I mean, quoting from this statement by the you know, the quote unquote Jersey girls. I mean, all of this essentially, you know, it's like if you really want to go after the true culprits of 9/11, or, you know, the idea of these masterminds, and I don't think you're ever going to really find, you know, four guys in a smoke-filled room that planned it all. But if you want to keep kind of going after more and more people, the Saudis is your best, like, entrance into that. Because again, I mean, all of these Saudis, they all tie back to the United States security establishment. You know, the national security state of the of America is entwined with the Saudis, and certainly with this event. And this is a way that you could actually kind of go after that. And, you know, and instead the whole Saudi angle gets kind of poo-pooed as some sort of red herring and a waste of time. And, oh, you're not talking about the Israelis enough, or you're not talking about buildings and things like that. And it just seems crazy to me.
Let me just say that anybody who thinks they know what happened on 9/11 are full of you-know-what. Because I've been doing this so long, and I don't know what happened that day. I know hundreds of discrepancies in what we were told about that day, you know, and the time leading up to that day, and so many things, and I just don't know. And that's a problem in and of itself, and I've said that for years, that we don't know, and you know what? We should. And it's disgraceful that we don't.
No, absolutely. Robbie, I'll throw it to you just to get your kind of thoughts and ideas on this, and particularly the Saudi angle, because again, I mean, I'm sure you've faced this as well. You know, you bring it up and people kind of roll their eyes and they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very interesting dynamic playing out in the 9/11 truth movement. And I actually saw it originally play out when John mentioned 9/11 Press for Truth. Not only did the mainstream media ignore it, but also a lot of truthers didn't just ignore it. They tried to smear it and claim that 9/11 Press for Truth was sort of, because at the time there was such wild narrative circulating in the 9/11 truth movement that a lot of people didn't even believe the hijackers existed, which was kind of a strange one that still sort of percolates to the top of 9/11 truth now. We know that they existed. We don't, in terms of how they flew the planes, their skills, that's all up for debate. I agree that's an interesting topic to discuss. But what I'm saying is, even 9/11 Press for Truth, because it implied Pakistani involvement and things like that, people wrote it off in the truth movement thinking, oh, they're just, this is just a limited hangout because it's wanting us to go after Pakistan. That's never how I saw that film, because it was just adding more puzzle pieces to what John described as a narrative that we, even as hardcore truther investigators, which, I mean, John is far more in that camp than I am, even in that world, it's pretty much impossible to actually figure out what happened. We can speculate, things about the buildings, but even just if we isolate it just to the buildings, we have to accept the fact that the crime scene was destroyed. That's something that we have to live with, and and just in terms of that, we probably will never get a full, complete picture of that because the evidence has been deliberately destroyed. Now, with just this idea that, that this is sort of also the key to solving 9/11, this 28 pages and the Saudi involvement, I think that that's naive as well. But at the same time, you can't write it off and say, oh, this means that they're trying to blame it on Saudi Arabia, and we know that's a limited hangout because there's all these, there was those Israelis, and there was that Pakistani money, and there was also the U.S. officials that might have played a role. But I don't I guess I tend to look at it like this is also just another puzzle piece to the narrative. And while, yes, there might be forces in the United States that will try to, make everything centered around this and act like this is sort of the end all to 9/11. Anyone who's been looking at this for a long time knows that that's not the case. I mean, even if you just want to look at some of these Saudi hijackers by themselves, I do think there's still a valid argument to be made that someone like Mohammed Atta, acted kind of like what we know of as like a classic patsy. He was making quite a lot of noise in Florida. He even threatened to murder someone at the Department of Agriculture before 9/11. These are all things that someone who was, the head of a really sophisticated operation wouldn't be doing. So there's still a lot of questions in terms of, in my mind, of what was the actual Saudi role? Was just why did the Bush administration work so hard to cover it up and use all of their resources to cover it up? And Obama. And I don't think it could be answered with the simple sort of Fahrenheit 9/11 narrative of, well, the Saudi Arabians, and the royalty is just so powerful. They have such an economic investment in the United States, et cetera, or even just the business ties with the with some of these Saudi royal people, or even the business ties with the bin Laden family. I feel like that doesn't explain it. And I feel like there's actually potentially a darker explanation there that I don't think is speculated on enough. And this is just my own opinion looking at this for a long time, that perhaps the Saudis were used by another group or a group of different entities as a proxy force or a front for part of this operation.
Well, one thing people need to know about history and terrorism is that in the 1980s, during the Russia-Afghanistan war, the U.S. supported what were called the Mujahideen, which became Al-Qaeda, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people accept the narrative that after the Afghanistan-Russia war was over, we stopped supporting the Mujahideen, but we didn't. We used them in the Balkans and in the Caucasus throughout the 90s. Using terrorists as a proxy to fight our wars, which we've seen in Libya, we've seen in Syria, we've seen so many places since 9/11. Literally, like we've been supporting terrorists in this war on terror.
With Syria being a primary example of that. I mean, now there's actual CIA officials coming out and saying, I forgot who it was. I just saw a tweet like right before we started recording of a former CIA official who said, my job in the CIA was to make friends with members of Al-Qaeda and convince them to work with us. And I think he was actually referring to Syria and al-Nusra. Yeah. So there you go.
There's a history of doing this up until 9/11, after 9/11. So there was a system, the CIA, the Saudis, the Pakistani ISI were all part of, and, Israeli Mossad were all part of what was going on with Iran and in the 80s. And so there was a system. The Saudis were funding things. The Pakistani ISI was funding things. Mossad was, army. Who knows? There were so many different aspects to this idea of using terrorists as a proxy. And it's very sad that Americans don't know this. So up until, who knows? After doing this for so long, first let me say that 9/11 was not an act of war. 9/11 was a mass murder. It was a crime. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And after doing this so long, I can honestly say that elements within our government and other governments have more than earned the title of suspect for the mass murder crime of 9/11.
Well, we are at the break right now, but we will be joined in the second hour by Robbie Martin and John Gold. We're going to be talking more about the Saudis, their connection to 9/11, and much more, so please stay tuned.
like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom, and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated. We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control the all out. Control is good. 5. Roger copy. 3. 2. 1. Okay.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you Live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us now in the second hour, we are joined again by Robbie Martin and John Gold. We've been discussing, we've sort of been kind of jumping all around, talking about 9/11 stuff, and I guess that's sort of inevitable because it is such a complex and at times very convoluted event, and there's so many puzzle pieces, and we've been kind of talking about the Saudi angle to this, which again, for a variety of reasons we talked about in the first hour, tends to get overlooked, and it tends to be viewed, in the mainstream it's viewed as a non-issue, and in the alternative sphere it's sort of viewed as you're, I don't know, like a sellout, or you're a shill, or you're not really looking close enough and it doesn't really matter, all these sort of stupid things get thrown around. But we were also talking about some of the current lawsuits that are going on, the families of victims on 9/11 who are trying to bring the Saudis to court. And John, you mentioned this Judge George Benjamin Daniels, who's in the Southern District of New York. And I wanted to kind of bring him up because this, again, I think will kind of, it sort of ties in multiple aspects of why, we don't want to look into why the U.S. government doesn't want you looking into the Saudis. And this sort of also illustrates the larger current geopolitical context that's going on, again, where we're not looking at the Saudis, who seem to be doing a lot of very interesting things with the Americans. And this guy, Judge George Daniels, along with being, a complete idiot, it seems, when it comes to his disbelief in the Saudi involvement, he's also had some other strange legal decisions, and I'll link up to some articles on this. But he's famous for ordering Iran to pay, I'm not joking, $10 billion to the families of victims of 9/11 and insurance companies. And this is, because he allowed this bogus case to sort of go forward. And basically, Daniel said Iran failed to provide evidence that they weren't involved in the 9/11 attacks. And this is in part because Iran never participated. They never, they didn't show up to these bogus court proceedings. So again, it's not as if they, it's just like a weird thing where basically he's punishing Iran and he's, asking them to pay $10 billion because they didn't prove that they weren't involved in 9/11. And this kind of, to me, is illustrative of a larger sort of campaign that's been going on in trying to link Iran to Al-Qaeda, trying to link Iran to the sort of global terrorist threat, linking Iran specifically to bin Laden. I've talked about these recent bin Laden files that have been declassified by Mike Pompeo. Groups like the Long War Journal, very neoconservative think tank, or Long War Journal is a website attached to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. They've made a lot of hay about this and basically saying, yes, this, completely confirms that Iran and Al-Qaeda have been working together forever. And then when you take, say, Judge George B. Daniels saying Iran is behind 9/11, then you have Mike Pompeo releasing some kind of dubious files that seem to link Iran and Al-Qaeda even more so. And then on top of that, you get the closeness between Trump and the Saudis, his first official visit as a president. I mean, they rolled out the freaking red carpet for Trump. These rumors that, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, allegedly paid Trump several millions of dollars, if not more, in cash that was delivered privately to his yacht, a Trump-owned yacht that parked outside of, I think it was Jeddah. and all this other stuff. And again, the rhetoric that coming from the Saudis that Iran is the ultimate, enemy. All of this, and it's not just the Saudis. I mean, Netanyahu has been raising this more and more so. And to me, and then I'll throw this to John and Robbie. To me, this is yet another example of why we should be looking into Saudi Arabia, not just their connections with 9/11, but again, there seems to be a growing, I would hate to think that in however many years from now, we're going to be talking about these sorts of moments, as these were the sort of precursor. This was the first steps before some sort of horrific event happens. And I don't know, John, I'll throw that to you first. Just when it comes to the, George Daniels and this sort of Iran rhetoric and the Saudis' involvement in all that.
Well, I have a little entry from historycommons.org that I'm going to read regarding Dietrich Snell. He was somebody who served on the 9/11 Commission. He was an investigator. In a late-night editing session, 9/11 Commission Executive Director Philip Zelikow and Dietrich Snell, head of the Commission team investigating the 9/11 plot, delete sections of the 9/11 Commission report linking two of the hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hamzi, to suspected Saudi government operatives. And that was in June of 2004, before the release of the 9/11 report, against the wishes of the staffers who worked on that aspect of it, and so forth. Now, quote, well, first off, Dietrich Snell was one of the witnesses in the Iran trial, and he said, quote, there is clear and convincing evidence pointing to involvement on the part of Hezbollah and Iran in the 9/11 attack. That was on May 20th, 2011, according to Philly.com. So he rewrote the 9/11 report with Zelikow to remove information linking, two hijackers to Saudi Arabia, and was more than happy to be a witness to link Iran to 9/11, something where there is virtually no evidence. During the 9/11 Commission, they had the chance to go to the NSA, I think, for one day to investigate what they had. And, sure enough, it seems that they found a little information that said the hijackers passed through Iran or something to that effect. But that's all they found on that one day, it seems, that I know of. The NSA was barely investigated with regards to 9/11. People should know that. Now, Judge George Daniels, first off, he always seems to make the wrong decision with regard to 9/11. And he's been doing that for a long time. There was another judge that was involved. I forget his name. He died, and Judge George Daniels took over. There's another judge that's very related to 9/11, Alvin K. Hellerstein. You guys may have heard of him. He's a different judge. Seems to make a lot of wrong decisions. I don't know. I used to call him the 9/11 judge, but this Judge George Daniels is now in the driver's seat, it seems. And he just seems corrupt. I don't understand, how the judge could actually say that Iran was involved. Remember, the September 11th Advocate's statement said that there was nothing in the terrorist monograph of terrorist financing that the 9/11 Commission released that said Iran was, involved financially or anything like that. And, I wrote an article at the time that this judgment was released. Gareth Porter wrote an article at the time. Russ Baker wrote an article at the time. Kristen Brotweiser, eventually, who is a 9/11 family member, wrote an article for Huffington Post that just showed it was just nonsense that Iran had any involvement in 9/11. But, everything else, Saudi Arabia, Pakistani ISI, Israel, the United States, it's just ignored. But, yeah, let's focus on Iran. Let's say they were responsible for 9/11. The endless blame pit that you can do with 9/11 because we don't know the absolute truth. They have the ability to point fingers and say they were responsible for 9/11. Everybody's responsible for 9/11, except those who were actually involved. Remember, Saddam was responsible for 9/11. There were 85% of the soldiers that were serving in Iraq during the first time they went thought that Saddam was responsible for 9/11. 85%. Can you imagine what they were told at the time? It just boggles the mind.
Even soldiers in Afghanistan fighting. There was I think there's a BBC documentary made in like 2010 where they went around interviewing U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, and they didn't even know that Afghanistan didn't attack us on 9/11. There was actually a soldier saying that pilots flew from Afghanistan and crashed into the World Trade Center. Like, the amount of knowledge that they were operating on was like shockingly low.
Let me say one thing about Afghanistan. There was a poll taken, 92%, I think it was 92% of Afghanis did not even hear of 9/11. They didn't even know what it was. Now, one thing about Judge George Daniels, let me say, quote, this is from 2010, quote, lawyers for families of 9/11 victims have taken the unusual legal step of asking a federal appeals court in Manhattan to replace a judge overseeing a group of terrorism financing lawsuits, saying he is moving too slowly in resolving key motions. That was from the New York Times, June 14th, 2010. That's regarding Judge George Daniels. They wanted to remove him because of how slow he was. And now, we're waiting to see what he says about the JASTA lawsuit against Saudi Arabia. And so what I'm asking people to do is to write a friendly letter to Judge George Daniels at 500 Pearl Street, New York, 1007, and ask him to allow the lawsuit to go through for the 9/11 families. That's it. I don't know what else to do at this point, to help them.
And John, if Daniels denies this motion, I mean, that is the end of the case, right? Is it at least in his courtroom?
Unfortunately, Chuck Schumer, is everybody familiar with him?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I'm from New York, so yeah, but believe me, I'm very familiar with Chuck.
Let me read this. This is from the New York Post, May 25th, 2016. Quote, it turns out that just before the vote, Senator Charles Schumer and other proponents of the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act stuffed an amendment into the final draft allowing the Attorney General and Secretary of State to stop any litigation against the Saudis in its tracks. Yes, JASTA would remove the statutory restrictions that have prevented 9/11 families from taking the Saudi kingdom to court, but Schumer helped craft an entirely new section to the original bill, giving the Justice and State Departments the power to stay court action indefinitely. All they have to do is inform the judge hearing the case that the U.S. government has engaged with Riyadh in diplomatic talks to resolve the issue, end quote. So Chuck Schumer did that. Now, after what happened at the latter part of last year with regards to Saudi Arabia and the coup or whatever it was, power consolidation, where all these important Saudis were arrested, supposedly including Bandar.
Yeah.
There were, I think, are they still staying? I had to take a break for a while, but are they still staying in that hotel? I know that,
as far as I know, they're still in the Ritz-Carlton being held. There was a prince or official who I believe was just released recently and, talked about being tortured and stuff.
I think one of them paid $7 billion to get out of this situation.
Yes, yeah.
That's not justice. I'm sure they have billions more, but with regards to all of that going on, a lot of the people that were arrested were listed. One of them was listed in the lawsuits from long ago. Individually, Bandar was, again, arrested. People, it seemed, that were related to the 9/11 attacks, or, the big head of the Bin Laden group, I think, was arrested too.
Yeah, it's Bin Laden's brother.
Right. He was listed years ago. Everybody should know that King Salman was listed in the lawsuits years ago. The the current king of Saudi Arabia. And let me see what else. Aramco. Saudi is trying to get their company, Saudi Aramco, their oil company, on a stock exchange, I think 5% worth of the company. And what they're doing is they're shopping around to different exchanges, and they want supposedly to go to the New York Stock Exchange, but they're fearful of the lawsuit because they're afraid that, they would be able to secure their money and so forth. So they're trying to say that they're skeptical of going to the New York Stock Exchange because of this lawsuit. So who knows what's going to happen? Maybe somebody is going to use the Schumer loophole to say that they're resolving this so that the Saudis can get on the New York Stock Exchange, which Trump asked for. I think it was how long after the coup or whatever, the power consolidation?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know what you're talking about.
Trump asked Aramco trade after this happened, I think. I think
it was like maybe within, I don't know, a few days or a week or so.
Yeah, it was within a few days. And remember, Kushner went for a trip to Saudi Arabia a week before this whole thing happened. And I don't know why. They said it was for one reason or another, but who knows what they were talking about. And there's just a lot of questions about it. And now, who knows what's going to happen? If they're going to use the Aramco thing to get out of the lawsuit, I don't know. I'm fearful of that because they'll do it.
Well, and again, as I was sort of saying before, this is especially this ramping up of war rhetoric with Iran, with Syria. I mean, this is all very reminiscent of prior to 9/11, or just after 9/11. Again, we're talking about the Saudis and the U.S. So, these connections and things have not died down. You were mentioning this power consolidation, and there's Bandar, Bin Laden's brother, several other people that are named in the lawsuit. So, maybe they're those people are being put out to pasture. But I mean, it's not as if MBS is any different from the rest of them. I mean, this is just his moment to shine. And he's got his useful idiot in, Donald Trump as opposed to Bush or vice versa. I mean, you know what I mean? Robbie, any kind of, thoughts or comments that you wanted to make on anything that we've just been talking about?
Well, I wanted to jump back to just this notion that John brought up about how, since we don't really know who is responsible for 9/11, they can just sort of shift the narrative around for a convenient scapegoat. And, Iran does seem to be in the crosshairs to a very strong degree right now. We already know that Saudi Arabia and Israel are sort of allied together against Iran.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it's that's very scary because we already see so many moves being made right now to try to, at least from Israel's side, more so, but also from Saudi Arabia's side, trying to draw Iran into a deeper conflict with them. Because what's happening right now is already scary enough. In Syria, that an Israeli jet was shot down. They claim it wasn't actually shot down. They just claimed it crashed. But then they're now blaming an Iranian-backed force of doing it. And Netanyahu is claiming now that Iran is flying drones into his country and is holding up props at speeches, just like he was doing with that bomb prop picture. And Nikki Haley, of course, around the same time that sort of Trump allied themselves so closely with Saudi Arabia, Nikki Haley went on, I think it was in front of the UN and brought out that missile prop.
Missile.
Yeah, saying that the Houthi rebels in Yemen who shot this at Saudi Arabia were actually Iranian. This is the Iranian proxy force. And so we're really getting closer and closer to some kind of conflict with Iran. And by we, I just mean sort of the three-way connection between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And I just feel like that's somehow just under the radar right now. And it's very, very dangerous and scary. And it really could sort of spark up at any moment. And even when we don't have a president in Iran like Ahmadinejad, who Ahmadinejad was definitely like spitting in the eye of the United States as much as he could, in sort of a fun and entertaining way. The new Iranian president is pretty moderate compared to him, but yet it doesn't matter. I guess my point is, regardless of that, we're still driving the train towards Iran. And I think that's how we need to look at the American foreign policy sort of military-industrial complex. It is a moving train that once it leaves the station, derailing that train is going to be seriously difficult. There's really nothing you could do other than sort of derailing it with some kind of jarring action. But in terms of this symbol I'm using, it is a moving train that cannot be stopped. And I think that's the way it needs to be seen, because they're going to try to find a way to do something. And I think that, these bin Laden leaks, through the Foundation for Defense of Democracies of all think tanks is very telling, because the Foundation for Defense of Democracies is probably, if I'm going to really isolate one neocon think tank that is the most warmongery, it's probably them. Out of all, even more than PNAC, even more than Foreign Policy Initiative. So, yeah.
I want to play a little clip if I can. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. This was the day that the JCI, the Joint Congressional Inquiry report, was released, and it was announced there was 28 redacted pages. And here's the press conference that this took place, where this took place. And this is a family member asking the people, Nancy Pelosi, Bob Graham, Porter Goss, two people who were in charge of the Joint Congressional Inquiry. This is a family member asking a question.
Actions. I'm the brother of a September 11th victim at the World Trade Center. And one of the more offensive things that has occurred since 9/11 is the exploitation of this tragedy as an excuse, if you will, to invade other countries, to invade Iraq, to plan on future invasions. And the reason that happens, I believe, is because there's this vacuum where there isn't information. And when I look at all of the things that are crossed out or not involved in this, that sort of gives me pause and makes me think that there's still a vacuum where anything can be suggested about anyone. So my question is, do you think that this document will be enough to put an end to all of these unsupported allegations or suspicions about other countries that were responsible for 9/11, or is there still work to be done on that?
Well, I don't. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Relevant to what we were saying?
That's what I'm saying. It's terrifying, the sort of parallels that I think we're seeing more and more. And just quickly, jumping back to what you were saying, Robbie, about this Syrian plane that was shot down by the Israelis, they knew. The Israelis knew that it was a Syrian fighter jet. And what's the first thing that Netanyahu does? He goes out, and his original press conference, he says it was an Iranian jet, knowing full well that it wasn't. So he was already willing to kind of spin this, and I think that was also a coded message that, his real fight is with Iran, not necessarily Syria or Hezbollah, or that he's not going to initiate some sort of war with them, but instead is, this is more about Iran, that's our real threat, and, we'll kind of keep it there. But it's the sort of ramping up of stuff. And again, as you were saying, with FDD being the premier think tank and news outlet that's pushing the Iran bin Laden story and all of that, that should also, that should be a clear message to people that there is a very specific agenda that is unfolding right now. And again, we seem to be kind of dropping the ball when it comes to all of this.
There is evidence over the years of, not knowing who the mastermind is, and what they've done is if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is in the news, then he's the mastermind. If Osama bin Laden is in the news, then he's the mastermind. This is what news does. I've documented it. So it's, I don't know who the mastermind was. I just don't think, you can either believe the conspiracy that the government has put forward, or you disagree with the conspiracy that the government has put forward. I want to mention something really quick about the conspiracy culture. I don't consider myself a part of that. The word conspiracy is just more than one person committing a crime. The 9/11, by definition, was a conspiracy. And the word, a lot of people have been trained to think that the word conspiracy means made up fairy tale. but it's used. The word is used in courtrooms all over the country. Conspiracy to commit this or that. Anyway.
No, absolutely.
I'm just saying.
No, the pejorative nature of it is
Alex Jones and all those.
Mm-hmm.
They're the people who just made Alex Jones. I can't say it. But
oh yeah, don't worry. I mean, we can have you back on. We can just go into to Jones and all of his insanity. I did want to because we've got about a half an hour left, and I did want to mention another important news story relating to 9/11, and this is in reference to the first responders and people that have become quite sick, and there are people that are sick from the toxins after the buildings collapsed. There are people that are dying, and in Trump's new budget plan, a lot of the treatment, the medication, monitoring, all of that stuff is going to be gutted from the World Trade Center Health Program, which is housed within the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which is part of the CDC, and that is going to be kind of moved into the National Institute of Health, I believe.
I have the report right here if you want me to read it.
Yeah, maybe you can explain that better, John, but I did want to talk about it.
Let me explain the environmental impact of 9/11 very quickly. And both of these issues, and there are so many other issues, in 2 hours, I would do a disservice to say that I know everything in this time, if I tried to summarize all of it during your show. But anyway, the environmental impact of 9/11, the buildings collapsed and so forth. There was dust everywhere. The White House made sure that the EPA told the responders, the people of New York, that the air was safe to breathe, that the water was safe to drink. Christy Todd Whitman made that statement. I think it was September 18th, 2001. As a result, thousands upon thousands of responders, New Yorkers have gotten sick, and over 2,000 have died already. When I say 2,977 people were brutally murdered on 9/11, I always put a little plus sign after that for the 9/11 first responders that have died. And for years since 9/11, since they started to get sick, I think it was in 2006, somebody by the name of James Adroga, who was a 9/11 first responder, died of black lung disease, something that coal miners used to get. And he was the first one. And it took years for the responders to get what was called the James Adroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act. Compensation Act passed, which, first gave them a limited amount of time. They had to come back and renew it after a certain amount of time. And every time there was a fight, they had to fight tooth and nail to get any kind of help. And these were the same people that our government and the news pundits used as heroes to show us, to get us all patriotic and ready for war. And, they used them for these purposes and all that. And then they treated them like, what? And just like our veterans, they treated them like trash. And it was just disgraceful. I didn't even know about this until 2004, when Janet Orkin spoke on a stage in New York City about the environmental impact of 9/11. I had no idea because the news wasn't telling us. And so many people were affected. There was a report that just came out, which you were talking about, quote, hidden in the fine print of President Trump's latest budget proposal is a detail that could directly impact 9/11 first responders, the reorganization of the federal agency that oversees their health treatment and monitoring. Under the 2019 fiscal year budget for NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, put forth by the White House, that agency will be carved out of the CDC and placed within the National Institute of Health. Although it would appear on paper to be a simple rearrangement, lawmakers and 9/11 advocates say the impact would be dreadful for the more than 83,000 responders and survivors who rely on the World Trade Center Health Program to receive treatments, medications, and monitoring for injuries and illnesses caused by toxins at Ground Zero and other 9/11 sites. Now, I can't believe we're still having this fight. 3 years ago, the James Adroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act was passed. They had 75 years worth of coverage. And I don't know what this is going to do, but I thought we were done. I mean, there's still a fight to get some cancers, I think, listed for people to be treated, which was another battle in and of itself. It's one of the most horrible things. You know, people say that American officials would never hurt Americans and so forth. That's an absolute false statement. When you look at what they did to the 9/11 first responders, and it was proven that they did lie in an effort to reopen Wall Street, it just boggles my mind. And, you know, when you go to criminal.findlaw.com, the second part of second-degree murder says, quote, a killing caused by dangerous conduct and the offender's obvious lack of concern for human life. So lying about the environmental impact of 9/11 resulting in thousands of thousands getting sick, over 2,000 dying, that sounds like an obvious lack of concern for human life and dangerous conduct to me, that these people need to be held accountable for, that many people need to be held accountable for. And that's one thing that we've never seen in 9/11 is accountability, you know, for the most part, for any aspect of 9/11. There's never been accountability. Now, there was another report that came out on February 7th of this year, quote, it's one that might even scare a Stuyvesant High School graduate. 2 former students at the elite Lower Manhattan school who were sickened by toxins on 9/11 want others to get screened, no matter how frightening the prospect. Students, okay, were affected by this. This is something else. December of 2017, quote, New York PD Captain Douglas Greenwood killed himself by shooting himself in the chest. He apparently told NYC photographer Kevin McCormick, quote, when there's no more quality of life, I'm going to do it, end quote. And he did it. In August 2017 of last year, it was reported that a father and son who were responders on 9/11 died within 9 months of each other. Okay? This is how horrible that situation is. And now they have the audacity to make them have to fight again for health care. It's just sickening to me. And I thought we were done. We're not, apparently. It breaks my heart is what it does. All of it does.
Oh, and this is something, and I'm going to throw it to you, Robbie, but this is something that, you know, there is no, you know, you don't have to get into, you know, crazy theories about, you know, involving the CIA. I mean, this is a very straightforward. I mean, they totally just lied. And I remember when oh no, it's totally fine, breathe the air, you know, I mean, for instance, my entire neighborhood was covered in 2 inches of dust from 9/11. My mother, when the towers went down, she works in Lower Manhattan. I mean, she was completely covered in dust running over the Brooklyn Bridge. You know, this stuff was everywhere. And it you know, and we never for a minute thought, oh yeah, it's totally safe. I mean, how could it be? You know, I mean, there's no way that, I mean, just regular dust in your house is not good for you, let alone. No, go ahead, Jim.
It wasn't even just Christy Todd Whitman that was making these reassuring statements. It was Giuliani. It was so many people saying that it was safe.
Giuliani, I mean, just commenting on Giuliani really quick. I think, you know, the more I look at 9/11, the more things point to him as one of the main players who covered, I mean, possibly, if you really want to rank it, possibly the main person to cover up the attacks in a lot of different ways. I mean, you know, I mentioned the crime scene being destroyed. That was completely his responsibility. He used to be the New York City district attorney. Of all people, he should know the importance of maintaining a crime scene and forensics. He destroyed that. And just going back to the health effects of these buildings being, in my opinion, blown up, the problem is that a lot of people will write this stuff off because it's associated with sort of some of these conspiracies about what happened to the building, but it's all still very factual information that the New York Port Authority, they knew how much dangerous levels of asbestos were in the building. If we just want to isolate it to asbestos, think about it this way. When the World Trade Centers were built, I believe they were finished construction in the early 70s. I'm not sure the exact date. They were the tallest buildings in the world. This was actually right before serious asbestos abatement laws were put into place in the United States. Those two buildings had, technically speaking, some of the most asbestos in them of any structure in the entire world at the time. Now, just that alone, looking back on that, thinking, wow, that's crazy that they put, that those two buildings were filled with so much asbestos. Well, the laws changed quickly afterwards, which basically made it a legal requirement to at least put an asbestos abatement plan in place, to sort of lock one in place. Now, the World Trade Center did do some minor asbestos abatement stuff, like removing a lot of the ceiling tiles, which apparently were made of asbestos. The fireproofing, of course, a lot of that had asbestos on it. But what's interesting is this is all public knowledge, and the amount of money that would have been required. This is, and I believe this checks out, and someone can correct me out there if they have different information. But the amount of money required to basically do what would have been the legal specification for full asbestos abatement would have been more than the actual value of the buildings themselves. So in a way, the buildings were sort of a money pit, which makes it even more interesting. You can completely remove the Larry Silverstein Pollitt comment from that PBS documentary, and he still seems very suspicious because he purchased those buildings, only 2 months or so before 9/11, knowing all this about them. They weren't privately owned before Larry Silverstein bought them. They were owned by the New York Port Authority. Sorry, go ahead, John.
The very fact that he owned the buildings, he should have been brought forward to testify about the buildings.
100%. Exactly.
No brain.
Yeah. And just that alone, should really, show how obvious it was, how dangerous this dust was. Just not to mention all the heavy metals and other things in the dust or whatever else was in there, but just the asbestos alone. Everybody who knew about the buildings, who had any technical knowledge about them, knew that. So just the cover up for that alone must have been huge. It involved hundreds, if not thousands, of people that just kept their mouths shut, and that's really disturbing in and of itself.
Oh, and just think about how many people, are going to be dying and getting sicker from this stuff. It's shocking. That, like you said, Jim, that in and of itself is a crime. 83,000 people are covered under, or have been registered with the World Trade Center Health Program. That's a lot of people that are at risk of dying because the government covered up how toxic the air and water was in and around the, ground zero.
Yeah. It's through the pit of your stomach. You can't believe that this is actually happening again. And they deserve to see accountability. They never got that, and they, now they're having again problems with the health thing. So it just breaks my heart, and I hope people start to pay attention to this. Pay attention to everything. If you follow 9/11, if you get Google 9/11 news alerts every day, you don't have any idea how many responders you see die. I think it's almost once a week, or it used to be once a week I would see responders dying. John Field posts on Facebook every time a responder dies. And I try to do the same, or used to, but I can't tell you how heartbreaking all that is.
No, and it raises all sorts of other questions as well. And like you were saying there, Robbie, how many conceivably thousands of people involved in covering up just the toxic levels of this? You know what I mean? It's just sort of like, if they're willing to go that far, and again, Larry Silverstein has a lot of questions to, why the hell was he buying these buildings? you know, knowing that they had, I mean, he would have to get them in compliance with New York state and city law.
Trump also apparently tried to buy them in the early 80s, which is strange because, you know, you would think as a real estate mogul, he would also have known about the levels of asbestos and how they basically were a money pit also. So just an aside.
Oh, yeah. But, well, yeah, you know, Trump, the truther, who's going to, you know, cut funding for 9/11 first responders. You know, all very odd. There's one final thing, unless you guys want to kind of, you know, add anything to that. But I did want to get your take on, you know, it's so funny. We were talking about all of these different aspects of 9/11, you know, that are just sort of being missed in the media and going unnoticed. And again, this was, I mean, this health thing was, you know, it was a big article in the Daily News. You know, again, you would think a judge ruling, even a judge ruling against, you know, that you can't sue Saudi Arabia, you'd think that would make it somewhere. But no, unless you're really kind of following law blogs and things like that, you're not going to see it. And, you know, and then amongst all of this, what do we have? We've got Hulu coming out with a mini-series based on Lawrence Wright's The Looming Tower with an all-star cast. Alex Gibney from, you know, who directed Going Clear, and some really great movies. I think Alex Gibney is a great director. He's producing and directing several of these episodes. It's got Lawrence Wright. It's Jeff Daniels is playing John O'Neill. It's Peter Sarsgaard. It's got everybody. And I just want to get both of your guys' takes on this, because this is like, why now? You know what I mean? It's like 9/11 is such a non-issue for so many people, and yet now they're going to make this really exciting Hulu miniseries. Let me rephrase that. It's an issue that affects everyone. They just don't know it. And it's a shame. So with regards to Lawrence Wright and his new thing, I'm not going to watch it. I'm afraid I can't watch things that are propaganda. Like Death to 9/11, United 93. I don't know if it's going to be propaganda. But yeah, why now? And why is that getting so much attention? Why did 9/11 Press for Truth get none? And all that stuff. But go ahead. Robbie, I mean, what's your, we kind of talked, I think we talked off air about this a few weeks ago. And you know, full disclosure, I mean, I've read The Looming Tower. I read it when I was pretty young in high school, and I did like it at the time, and I think it is the classic kind of safe narrative to 9/11, you know, which basically Lawrence Wright kind of, I mean, he points to Saudis and the Pakistanis a little bit, and he even introduces some sort of hints that the CIA may or may not have sort of known a little bit more. But it is basically like the, you know, classic intelligence failures. John O'Neill is the sort of hero for much of the book. You know, trying to kind of uncover lots of stuff, and, you know, it's sort of this, almost like this farcical story where it's like, you know, everyone sort of failed. I mean, what do you think of this, Robbie? Wait, sorry, hold on. Let me silence this phone call here. Let me respond. Go ahead. No, The Looming Tower, I've always seen it as the connective tissue that is designed to plant a more cohesive narrative in the public mind. And I'm not saying Lawrence Wright is some kind of stooge necessarily, or like he's a spook working for the CIA. But what I think is that, you know, it reminds me a lot of, there's actually a book called American Anthrax, which is very interesting, which at the time that the anthrax attacks were quote unquote solved, there was several books that came out that sort of narratively tried to construct this really in-depth narrative of why Bruce Ivins was the killer. And it connected together a lot of different pieces, a lot of different things from mainstream media reports. And I feel like it was sort of, those books sort of filled the void of, oh, well, this is actually what happened on the anthrax attacks, because the FBI, you know, never really showed us a cohesive narrative. So this sort of serves as that. And I feel like The Looming Tower, at least in the public lexicon, serves as sort of, this fills in the missing pieces that the 9/11 Commission report didn't explain. Yeah. So that's sort of how I've always seen it. And for that reason alone, I've been cautious about it because, you know, I want to see the actual proof, the actual hard evidence
that all these hijackers were, sort of connected to this, not necessarily the Malaysia summit, but were directly connected to bin Laden's organization. And the Looming Tower does a really good job of sort of connecting all these dots. But yet the U.S. government, in my mind, has not really shown us any proof of a lot of that. So to me, I've always been very cautious about that book, but that's just, that's my personal opinion on it.
Okay, with regards to incompetence and making mistakes and all of that, I want to remind people of a couple of things. The Bush administration came into office wanting to go to war. They went to war. They came into office, wanting to expand executive power. Guess what they did? They expanded executive power. They wanted to make billions for their corporate friends. Guess what? They made billions for their corporate friends. These people were anything but incompetent, I think, and they got a lot of things that they wanted to do done. So is that incompetence, or I don't know. I have a hard time with it.
Oh, so do I. And so much of Lawrence Wright's book, and I'm not I think personally, I like Lawrence Wright as a writer. I think he's a great, Going Clear is by no means the full picture of Scientology. For a full picture, you should read Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller, or of course, A Piece of Blue Sky by John Atack. But it is a good book nonetheless. It's a well-written book. The Looming Tower is well-written and is an exciting book, but it is basically a series of interviews retold by Lawrence Wright of, various different characters, basically saying, it wasn't my fault, it was this guy's fault. Because I had it's Ali Soufan saying, he had the information, but this guy wouldn't share it. And then this person, well, I had this piece, but, I couldn't share it, or I wouldn't be shared. And, it is like, I think in a lot of ways, like you said, Robbie, it is like the kind of the piece of writing, again, Pulitzer Prize winning book that's quite thick, with a lot of good, there's a lot of good details in there, but it does sort of just kind of lay out, this is the story that maybe wasn't told, or this is the more sort of exciting version of the story you didn't get in the 9/11 Commission report. And it again, to be a bit, conspiratorial, to put my tinfoil hat on, I find it interesting that this show is now coming out, given all of this kind of talk that we're hearing in the geopolitical realm, be it with Iran, North Korea, Syria, Hezbollah, any of those things, and also with this sort of unending, rebranding of Al Qaeda, it's sort of disappeared. Yet, if you're really paying attention, supposedly, the U.S. is killing hundreds of Al Qaeda operatives in Yemen on like a daily basis.
Can I remind? I'm sorry. When ISIS first came out, or was newsworthy, Al Qaeda came out with a statement saying that they were too bad even for Al Qaeda, the supposed people that murdered 2,977 plus people on 9/11. Go ahead.
Well, no, I just, again, they seem to, they can't quite let go of Al Qaeda, and I wonder if this isn't a wonderful way of kind of, bringing Al Qaeda back. Don't forget, they were the ones responsible for this, and they are or just simply to remind people that, the ultimate evil right now is Islamic terrorism, and there's, absolutely no connection between, our funding of Islamic terrorists, since the 1980s onwards and what we see right now. And so, I find the timing very suspect.
Let me tell people that to go look up the phrase, quote, Al Qaeda linked groups and moderate rebels. And you'll find tons of information in Libya and in Syria or wherever of the U.S. supporting and working with them. Isn't that odd during this, quote, war on terror? But I want to point out something with regards to Bandar that we didn't get a chance to touch on really quick. This is a report from CBS News. It's from April 15th, 2004. It's called Woodward Shares War Secrets. And very quickly, hold on, I got to find Bandar. Okay. Woodward says he described Powell as semi-despondent, quote, because he knew that this was a war that might have been avoided. That's why he spent so much time at the United Nations, end quote. But it turns out 2 days before the president told Powell, Cheney, and Rumsfeld had already briefed Prince Bandar, the Saudi ambassador. Quote, Saturday, January 11th, with the president's permission, Cheney and Rumsfeld called Bandar to Cheney's West Wing office, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Myers, is there with a top secret map of the war plan. And it says, quote, top secret, no foreign. No foreign means no foreigners are supposed to see this, says Woodward. Quote, they describe in detail the war plan for Bandar. And so Bandar, who's skeptical because he knows in the first Gulf War, we didn't get Saddam out. So he says to Cheney and Rumsfeld, quote, so Saddam this time is going to be out, period. And Cheney, who has said nothing, says the following, quote, Prince Bandar, once we start, Saddam is toast. After Bandar left, according to Woodward, Cheney said, quote, I wanted him to know that this is for real. We're really doing it, end quote. So it seems like there was a collaboration of sorts between Saudi Arabia and the United States regarding war. And of course, there are other information regarding other countries, but go ahead.
No, I mean, yeah, again, this sort of behavior seems to be happening yet again. And, I encourage people out there to be more cognizant of this and to be paying a little bit closer attention to all of this stuff, and maybe perhaps not being so obsessed with, something like the looming tower. Although I probably will watch it, if only to complain about it on the radio show. But we are fast running out of time, and I wanted both of you guys to let everybody know where they can go to listen to your work and check stuff out. So, Robbie, of course, let everybody know where they can go.
Well, you can check out my documentary film series, A Very Heavy Agenda, which is about how the neocons seized power after the Bush administration and carried that power through the Obama administration and essentially got us into this sort of Russiagate scenario that we're in now. And American Anthrax is another documentary film that I produced. That one's free on YouTube. And both of those documentaries owe quite a lot to John Gold's research and his amazing skills to pull things from archives. And I really owe a lot to you, John, for contributing so much to both of those films.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say. I want to say Robbie does tremendous work with Media Roots. I'm not really into his music, but sorry. But with Media Roots and other, the documentaries that he's just done a tremendous job. He's grown a lot over the years. I knew, he was into Alex Jones years ago, but look at where he is today. He's a real journalist. And, I give him so much credit. For me, I would just tell people to go watch two documentaries that are available on YouTube. First one is called 9/11 Press for Truth. The second one is called In Their Own Words, The Untold Stories of the 9/11 Families. And if you aren't outraged after watching those two things and want to do something about the 9/11 issue, I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, I have tons of stuff on my YouTube channel, which is Gold9472. I did a series of 31 interviews with the best of the best for a show that I did called We Were Lied to About 9/11. That's available at archive.org or YouTube channel, but they silenced the first 48 seconds because I used Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name of as my intro, killing in the name of 9/11. Mm-hmm. And they didn't like that, so they took that out. So there's 48 seconds of silence in the first 11 episodes, I think. Read the book that I did. I've written several articles over the years. That's basically it. I want to thank Pierce for letting me and Robbie on today to talk about these important issues.
Oh, well, thank you both to John and Robbie, and I would love to have both of you back on again very soon to discuss all this stuff. And thank you to all the listeners for listening. Next week, hopefully, we will be talking with Kevin Gasola and hopefully get a live report from the Reality Winter Trial down in Augusta, Georgia. But until then, I will be talking to you all very soon.
taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
Assassination. You know what's interesting about assassination? Well, not only does it change those popularity polls in a big hurry, but it's also interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. Do you ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam! Right in the head. Apparently we're not ready for that. Yeah, that's difficult behavior for us. We're too busy sitting around trying to think up ways to kill each other. Here's one we came up with. It's efficient, too. Genocide, you know? Killing large numbers of people simply because they don't look like you, they don't talk like you, and they don't have the same kind of hats you do. You ever notice that anytime you see two groups of people who really hate each other, chances are good they're wearing different kind of hats. Keep an eye on that. It might be important.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom, and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated. We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5. Roger, copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.